welcome to another video that is especially made for those of you who are not only too lazy to read, but who are also too lazy to look at pictures. We are continuing with the Zed series that is getting more interesting with every new issue. In fact, every issue so far revealed something new, be it Zed's real name, Zed's secret love that was promised to Shen, or even how do Jin's illusions work. And issue 3 is no different. Be ready for some major reveals. So without further ado, let's have a look at the issue 3 of the Zed series. As always, the map at the beginning is getting updated with new places that will be mentioned in the comic. This time we got some new places in the north, which I will show you as we go through them in the comic. This comic issue starts in the White Cliffs Inn, near the Kinko Temple of Koshin, which you can find on the map. Straight from the beginning, the comic got very suspicious for me, because I realized I already read about these scenes somewhere. And I hate to say it, but I was right last time we talked about this. I managed to predict that the comics will retell the extra story we got for Jin. So as I kept reading the comic, I was going back and forth between the written story and the comic. So now I will show you all the differences. Keep in mind that because the comic is newer, whatever the comic shows is the canon version of the story. So just be aware that the short story called The Man with the Steel Cane is the exact same story which you will see here. So enough about that, let's have a look at what's happening. Zed and the Yan Lei, which is a name for his group of shadow followers, decided to follow Shen because Zed had to talk to him. Kane was very impatient, and he just wanted to kill Shen. They will never have a better opportunity, but Zed knew that if they were to defeat Jin, they would need Shen on their side. And in fact, Zed mentioned that Shen is the only one he can trust with this. And so Zed ordered his Yan Lei to stay outside, and Zed himself followed Shen inside the inn. And here is where the cool comparisons start happening. The written story mentions that Shen ordered a perfect bowl of soup. And long and behold, there is soup on the table. That's a nice attention to detail. Shen also says, "Your students are as quiet as a pregnant Vorex," which is an exact quote from the story. But here we get the first difference. In the written story, Shen was 10 paces and 1/2 of a finger length away from Zed. In the comic, he was 3 spans and 4 fingers width away from Zed. Important, I know. What's also interesting is that this entire scene was rewritten for the comics. In the written story, Shen just sat in his chair and he was enjoying the soup. But here, the moment Zed stepped in, both of them drew their blades. They never even got to that part in the written story. On top of that, in the written story, Shen just says, "I do not act because of vengeance. You defy the balance. For that, you are damned." And that was pretty much the only threatening thing that happened there. But in the comic, Shen says, "I am Kinko. I should not act out of vengeance for my father, but this is not an opportunity I will pass up." And after that, Shen just attacks Zed, which he never did in the written story before. What is cool is that the written story said that Shen was preparing for an attack. It even described how he was sliding one of his feet behind him, as he was getting ready to jump forward. You can even see that stance in the comic. But again, in the comic he actually attacks, which he didn't do previously. And here is where we get some new reveals. As the two fight, Zed had an internal struggle inside his head. There was a part of him that wanted to argue with Shen. He wanted to tell him what really happened back there. What really happened when Kusho died. And that's where we get a flashback to 10 years ago, when the Noxian sieged the Navori region. The comic mentions that the Noxian army surrounded their city, and they were cut off from the rest of the Navori Brotherhood. Now, if you don't remember who they are, the Navori Brotherhood are the rebels of Ionia. When Noxians attack, half of the people believe that balance will eventually strike, and nature will deal with everything, as it had in the past with every Ionian problem. But the Noxian invasion was so massive that half of the people didn't believe that nature could deal with it anymore. And so some people started fighting back. That is how the Navori Brotherhood was founded. And here we learned that Zed's followers were allied with them. In fact, because Zed has his black and red armor, it is obvious that this takes place after Zed was kicked out, because he was fiddling with shadow magic. And so the reason why there are other people with also black and red armor is because these guys are his followers. Anyway, as the Noxians pushed forward, Zed and his followers had to evacuate everyone, which already tells us that Zed was never the bad guy. Just like many Ionian murderers, except for the crazy one, they were murderers because they protected the innocent. As the situation got even worse, Zed realized that they couldn't repel the Noxian army, not without more power. And so Zed and his followers left the battlefield, in hopes that the refugees would survive. But whether they do, we never learn. Sometime later, Zed and his followers arrived at the Great Kinko Temple of Navori. And this is where the comic shows us the point around which Zed's entire story revolves. The moment Shen's father dies. Unlike what Zed's bio hinted at before, Zed didn't march back onto the Kinko Temple for revenge. Zed and his followers marched back onto the Kinko Temple because they needed more power to save the innocent. Specifically, Zed was looking for power hidden inside the temple. But Kinko just told him that the war isn't their concern and so they will not fight. The thing is, Zed didn't come here to ask the Kinko for help. He came here to take the Tears of the Shadow. And this is where things get really interesting. We always knew that the Great Kinko Temple held a forbidden artifact inside. It was always described as the Black Box, but we never knew what was inside that box. Well, now we know that the box held the Tears of the Shadow, which were the source of the Shadow technique. Kusho explained that the magic the artifact held was forbidden, and he now regretted ever telling Zed about it. Kusho then said that war and death are nothing in the face of eternity. But Zed wouldn't listen to his warnings. He just came to take the box and the magic ichor it contained. After which, we got a big reveal. Kusho replied that the tears are powerful because they are not of our world. Because they do not belong in our world. And here is when I realized, god damn it, they are making the memes real. If you don't know, in the past I always hated the theory that Zed would be Nocturne, or that Nocturne would be Zed. That theory is incredibly old, it is incredibly outdated, and it is just stupid. The entire theory was based on the fact that Zed's skin's art matched Nocturne's art. It was just stupidity all around. However, the only thing that matched is that Nocturne used shadows and Zed used shadows. But up until now, it was never confirmed whether the two shadows were actually part of the same thing. And here we got another hint that they are. Because if you don't remember, Nocturne was artificially created during the Rune Wars. Back then, when mages held a lot of power, some of them experimented with shadow magic. They figured out that there is a hidden realm beyond the mortal realm. It wasn't necessarily the spirit realm either, but it was a hidden place in between. They called it the Shadow Realm. And they learned that they were able to use the power of the Shadow Realm to cast spells. But as they used more and more of the Shadow Realm's power, and as they used it more and more as a gateway to jump instantly between 2 points in the Mortal Realm, the magic power of Runeterra slowly tainted the Shadow Realm. And this combined magic eventually spawned Nocturne. And because Nocturne was born in the Shadow Realm, he is annoyed whenever someone steps into his realm. And so Nocturne now haunts anyone who even touches his realm. So when Kusho mentions here that the tears are powerful because they are not of their world, he's not talking about the realm of the dead, which is a whole different realm. The tears of the shadow are not from their world because they come from the Shadow Realm, which would mean that Zed and Nocturne are legitimately connected. So with this information, let's keep going. Instead of Kusho straight up giving the tears of the shadow to Zed, he offered Zed to walk with him inside, and together they would destroy them. Which is something Zed obviously didn't want to do. He needed the power of the Tears of the Shadow so he could protect Ionia. Here Zed mentioned that the Tears of the Shadow, when consumed or tattooed, give the user the Shadow Magic, for which his order was named. Notice that he calls it the Shadow Magic. He doesn't call it the Shadow Technique anymore, which was the only distinguishing factor. So now that we know that the Shadow Technique and the Shadow Magic from the Rune Wars are the same, things could get a lot more interesting for Zed and Nocturne in the future. Either way, the comic then shows what the story always told us. The story told us that there was a scream, and the next Zed emerged from the temple, there was blood on his hands and he held the dark box, which is the exact scene we can see here. However, here we got more context. Zed mentioned that Kusho was weak, and he made the Kinko Order weak, while Zed offered everyone strength. Zed promised that he would fight for their homeland, which again means that Zed was never the evil guy. He was always the good guy who needed the power of evil to protect his home. What's even cooler is that Zed mentioned that some of the Kinko died that day, but it was only those who fought back. All the Kinko ninjas who decided to flee were simply let go. Zed accepted anyone who wanted to join them, he killed anyone who was against them, but he never killed anyone who wouldn't harm them. Should you decide to stand idle, it wasn't ideal, but you weren't considered the enemy of the Shadow Order. In fact, at the very end of this scene, Zed mentioned that their homeland needed the Demon Hunters, the Exorcists, and Balancers. He never denied that. Before we jump into the present days, here's my theory as to what happened here. I don't think Zed would kill Kusho so easily. What I think happened is that Kusho opened the box and he wanted to destroy the Tears of the Shadow. But as a defense mechanism, the Tears corrupted Kusho, so Kusho then turned against Zed. I believe this is what happened, because if you go back in the comic, when Zed fights Shen, he struggles because he wants to tell him what really happened. Which, if Zed just murdered Kusho without a reason, he wouldn't feel guilty. There would be nothing to tell him. Zed would simply be a murderer. But if Zed had to kill Kusho in self-defense, because Kusho was corrupted, that would be a pretty good reason to have an internal struggle. Whatever happened in the Great Temple that day, I don't think it was as simple as Zed killing Kusho because Kusho wanted to protect the Tears. There was probably something more happening there. Which is why Riot still never showed us what actually happened inside the temple. It's because there is something more to it. But anyway, let's go back to the present days. Again, remember, in the previous version of this story, Shen never attacked Zed, so none of these images actually happened. Here, as Shen attacks Zed, Zed finally tells him that Kada Jin escaped, at which point Shen finally stops. Previously, Zed told Shen about Jin before anything even happened. Either way, the rest of this scene is exactly the same. Zed managed to convince Shen to calm down after he told him to remember what Jin is capable of, to remember all the victims. And just like it was before, it was the memories of the gored victims which calmed Shen down. But what's hilarious here is that the story previously said Shen put his swords on the table. He looked down at the perfect bowl of soup. And long and behold, he's looking at the soup. Again, great attention to detail. After this, there is a short conversation between Zed and Shen, where Zed is aware that Shen is the only one who can capture Jin. Zed could never be able to do it on his own. He even told Shen that he wanted to work with him, and after Jin was captured again, Zed would gladly offer his neck to him, to grant him his vengeance. But Shen refused. He would never work with him, not even for this. Honor demanded that since Zed was technically a messenger, he wouldn't be harmed. This was according to something called the Code of Tuon. And so, Zed was free to leave alive. But Shen warned him, Zed should hide in the mountains, because after Jin was captured, Shen will find him, and Zed would die. Meanwhile, outside there is a whole another story happening. We have Akali who was now working with Shen. Even though remember, Akali is not actually part of the Kinko anymore. She is a lone ninja now. When Akali approached Zed's followers, the Yanlei, she mocked them by asking them if they knew where she could get some shadow magic. Again, notice that she called it magic, not shadow technique. What's curious is that Kain recognized Akali. He knew her as the lone ninja, which makes me wonder, how does he know about her? It could be because Akali is a known warrior, because she now fights for the innocent, and so her name would probably spread around, unlike when ninjas don't actually care about the war. But it could also be because previously, in Akali's very old story, it was hinted that Akali was actually a member of the Shadow Order for a time, which she then left as well. It's like a little reference that Kain and Akali actually know each other, even though Akali never was a member of the Shadow Order. But the main reason why that's probably the case is because I noticed that Akali doesn't actually know Kain's name. If they were both part of the same order, they would know each other. Whatever the case may be, here we learned that Akali finds Kain attractive and hot, and she likes that he doesn't wear a shirt, because his abs are great. But his eyes were crazy, and that's what turned her down. Then there's a quick shot of Jin spying on Shen and Zed. When Zed left the inn, Jin was disappointed that Shen didn't kill him, which is why Jin needs to come up with a new plan. After this, Zed meets Akali outside, and even though Akali sees that Shen let him go, Akali technically doesn't follow the same code, and so she attacked him straight away. But like the badass he is, Akali was barely an inconvenience to him, and so with one simple motion Zed just parried her. After that, Zed and the Yanlei moved out, before reinforcements arrived to hunt them down. Shen simply shouted after him that he is coming for him. After the Yanlei were further from the village, we got a scene that doesn't seem too important, but I believe it will play a part later on. Zed was aware that Shen would now go and hunt Jin, which meant that if Zed followed Shen, he would eventually lead him to Jin. Kain realized this as well, and so when Kain asked Zed what would happen if Shen discovered him, Zed replied that it wasn't a question if Shen discovers him, it was when he gets discovered. And we all know that the next time Shen sees Zed, he's going to kill him. And so, bearing this future on his shoulders, Zed gathered the Yanlei around, and he told everyone that when he dies, his best student, Kain, will be the successor. Again, this small scene is played as if it didn't matter, but I do believe that something is going to happen and Kane might become the next master of the Shadow Order. Anyway, after this, Zed left the Yanlei, and he followed Shen on his own. Shen started investigating at the last place where Zed found Jin's victims. This is the place we saw in the previous comics. From there, they followed a river which Jin probably used to escape. That led them to the docks. In the docks, they interrogated the boatsmen to give them the list of travelers on the latest ship. From that, they learned that every passenger on that ship was killed by a demon. After going through all the passengers' names, they learned that they were mostly from the Jaeza family. And when they asked about the family, they learned that the Jaeza had some issues with the local radicals. When they approached them, they learned about a person known as the Nanthi Elder, whom the radicals believed had something to do with this. And so Shen followed the Nanthi Elder until they got to Nanthi in southern Zayun. Of course, with Zed following them all the way. And this is where the comic continues following the written story. Many of the quotes are exactly the same. For example, when they arrived at that place, they learned that there was a fresh murder inside the inn, and the only survivor who saw the victim kept mumbling about flowers. This was directly taken from the story. And it even perfectly replicates the next scene, when Akali walked into the inn where the murder happened, so she could see what's going on. Shen stopped her. Akali questioned what makes him think that she's not ready, and Shen simply replied, because he wasn't when he was her age. Zed then secretly decided to investigate the place. He was roped because the Kinko still didn't know that he was following them. But as he looked around, he noticed that the lanterns were tied to the houses in weird ways. Instead of being on a single rope, there were two strings connecting each of them. And when he got closer, he realized that the other string was a fuse, because the lanterns were actually bombs, and all of this was a trap. This is where the comic ends, and interestingly enough, I am not sure if this is a bug, but the last part of the old story was cut as well. There is supposed to be part 4, because of Jin, but it seems that the story was edited so that it ends at part 3. So even in the written story, we don't know what happens next. Theoretically, if I search in my mind, I remember that all of these bombs go off, there is massive chaos in the city, and Jin jumps onto a ship that is heading to foreign lands. This is very likely how Jin's story gets connected to what we saw in Awaken. The ship heading to foreign lands is actually heading to Piltover, which would make perfect sense. So I wonder if this is what we're going to see in the next issue. So far, it is really cool that this issue alone explained what is happening with the shadow techniques, and it is retelling an old story in a way that makes sense. And with each new issue revealing new things, I can't wait to see what happens next. I really do believe that at the end of the story, Jin will be heading towards Piltover. After all, they have a lot of theaters there. But it makes me wonder, what's going to happen to Nocturne and Zed in the future? Zed is using the magic of the Shadow Realm, which is surely annoying Nocturne. And so when Nocturne finally catches him, Zed might be in great danger. What is cool is that when you realize that Zed was supposed to be the Eye of Twilight, which means that Zed was supposed to hold the Spirit Blade, that would give him the option to fight back spirits. So in an alternative universe, where Zed became the Eye of Twilight, not only would he be able to fully control the shadow powers, but with the Spirit Blade in his hands, should Nocturne find him, he would have a weapon to use against him. It's just a cool little thing I realized while reading the comic. Zed was so close to be the ultimate warrior, but all of it got screwed by a single horny madman. Hey, did you know that we have social media and Twitch where we talk about other League facts and stories? And did you know that we have Need mugs and shirts too? The links to all of that will be below. And as always, thank you, come again.